Welcome. 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 Welcome, board members. Welcome to your board, the RDA board, which is why you're here today, right now. Hi. Hi. We're at a board meeting today. Just making, I like attention, so I'm making sure I have it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the RDA board meeting. We're ready to get going because we have a quorum, finally. We will start with general comments to the board. I don't have any, I don't think. Anybody? Nope. Okie doke. We have no public hearing, so on to business. I do need an approval of the minutes of Tuesday, June 4th, 2019, and Friday, June 28th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
Whoa. I have a motion by Board Member Rogers, a second by Board Member Luke. All those in favors? Aye. Favor. Any opposed? Okay, there we go. And next, RDA Capital Improvement Program projects. Mr. Ben Ludke and Danny Walls, please take it away. Danny, you seem unprepared for that agenda item. Did I surprise you?
I was counting on Ben doing all the talking, so.
There you go.
This is the first briefing for RDA capital projects for fiscal year 2020. A second briefing is scheduled along with potential action next month on August 20th. There are 9 capital projects this year, several of which are legally required. The annual allocation has decreased over the last 3 fiscal years from $6 million in fiscal year 18 to $4.7 million in fiscal year 19 to $2.6 million this year. And this is a little misleading because the RDA also does capital projects and budget amendments throughout the year, including most recently in April when several $1 million were approved as part of budget amendment number 4. So there were actually more capital projects in that budget amendment than in this fiscal year 2020 capital budget. The importance of capital projects is that they don't lapse to fund balance at the end of each fiscal year. They're available year after year. They don't fall to fund reserve. There are several general policy questions that we can go through. They are on page 3 and 4 of the staff report. Or if it's more helpful, we can go over the summary table of projects and board members can raise questions as we go, whichever you'd prefer.
Board members? Take it away, Ben. Let's just go through the project, the policy questions as we have them.
Okay.
Written, please.
And before I do that, I just want to point out that all of you on your desk should have the CIP book, the mayor's recommended, and this includes the city general fund. It also includes all of the enterprise funds, so the RDA, golf, public utilities, and the airport. And the RDA portion starts on page E52. The first project in the Central Business District is a request for $229,000 for improvements to 100 South, and this is a 1-block stretch from West Temple to Main Street. The project doesn't have a specific scope or a funding target, and the amount, there's a policy question that this could be either combined or you could instead use an existing appropriation that was approved last year for downtown placemaking improvements. It was $244,000. And this could go to the design for reconstructing that part of the street. It could go to street furniture. The funding is flexible. It doesn't have a specific purpose right now.
Of course.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ben. As you may recall, this came out of conversations that started last year with Downtown Alliance folks and some business property owners who brought to former council member or board member Kitchen and my attention, I think Andrew Johnston, I think you were there too, that we haven't made investments in that pedestrian pathway in over 20 years. And it's really the funnel from the convention center into the downtown core, and they're asking for really some immediate improvements, which is a lot of what Ben talked about, maybe seating options, different planter options, maybe some art installation, not clear exactly yet. I think they're open to also a longer planning, visioning process, but they were looking for some investment that could be, I'm losing my words.
Short term.
Hit the ground soon. That's what I'm trying to say. So I feel I'm supportive of this, and I'm curious if other board members have opinions about it. I think if we want to go into a visioning process in the future, that's great, but I know that these funds could be utilized, I'm sure they could be utilized rather quickly and with good impact.
And one thing to highlight is the $244,000 for downtown placemaking was originally envisioned as leveraging private funds, so adjacent property owners perhaps, or maybe even the Downtown Alliance. So if the board was interested in combining those funds, it would be a little bit of a change in the original intent of the downtown placemaking.
Okay, are there other questions? Anna?
No, I would actually be supportive of this, this improvement. That area has, is seeing a lot of improvements by the property owners around there, and the new hotels and the new development that we have. So I think this would be a great opportunity for us to also help the Central Business District. So, yes.
Anybody else? I do have a question about, I'm supportive of doing this. We, in fact, were going to appropriate RDA money last year during our budget season to this, but decided to kind of hold off and I actually appreciate this coming through more of the CIP rather than how we did it before, so I like it. My, of course, only question is, how is it going to be maintained in the future?
I don't think we can answer that until we know exactly what it is going to construct.
Okay, so as long as we keep that in mind.
Staff will keep asking.
Thanks.
I have a comment on that one, but that's what we keep hearing. Like, well, we don't know what the maintenance is going to look like because we don't know what's going to happen there. But I think what we talked about policy-wise was like, well, we do need to set aside an amount or something so that we are thinking ahead, whatever happens with it, because we run into the same issues over and over that an idea comes up and then we do something and then it falls apart because we don't have the funds to help with the maintenance. So I'm not sure if it's been recorded or if there's any way that we can actually, it's like a policy that we say, well, 10% of this money, it's going to go towards maintenance. I don't know, something like that.
I'll let Danny sort of address this because I think that is part of what we've been talking about it in our projects and policies. So if you want to address that, Danny.
No, I think that's, thanks for that question, the opportunity to answer. Yes, that is what we plan as RDA, at least, that is we bring these projects to the board to have that conversation up front to at least inform or give you the information so that when we make the decision for funding, that is either part of that decision or allocation of funds, or at least the source of funds is identified for who will maintain that on an ongoing basis, just so you as a board and a city council are making that as part of your decision and it doesn't hit you in the future. So we anticipate bringing that back to the board as part of a amendment to our budget policy so that we just build that into our process as we bring these items to you, that would just be part of the due diligence we do as part of you approving the funding. Okay. So we anticipate codifying it within that policy.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next project is in Block 70, and it's a request for $100,000 to go to the Regent Street Parking Structure Capital Reserve. The agency entered a 60-year agreement that obliges contributing funds for capital repairs and possible replacement of the parking structure. This agreement provides parking for the Eccles Theater. The agreement goes through September 2073. The $100,000 is an initial amount based on the available tax increment. And there's a policy question if the board would be interested in understanding what the potential costs for a worst case scenario, such as replacing the entire parking structure, might cost, so that you can keep that in mind year to year. I also want to highlight that the parking structure did go through several improvements and renovations in 2015, 2016 before the Eccles Theater opened.
Is this an obligation that we have? You said an agreement, so is this an obligation that we have as part of our contribution to the Eccles Theater? I'm sort of looking at you because you're on that board.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of contributing factors to the unique nature of this agreement. I think this is before we had a little bit more clarity of, in terms of role clarity of what contracts can and can't obligate in terms of future boards. The other contributing factor here is that this allowed the Eccles Theater project to be built with no parking. It would have likely been a significantly more expensive project if parking had to be accommodated on site. And so this was a way to utilize an underutilized parking structure that was across the essentially across the alleyway from the Eccles Theater. So there were policy reasons to get into an agreement like this. I think maybe knowing what we know now, we might have had to structure the contract differently, but it is what it is. And Ben is correct that PRI did some pretty extensive renovations to the parking structure prior to the opening of the Eccles Theater in anticipation that it will be used for a much longer period of time than was originally before the Eccles Theater was built. So.
Okay.
The other policy question for the board is if you'd like the attorney's office to review the contract, since this was before the separation of powers happened, so the attorney's office could identify any areas of concern.
Board members? Is that, would you like the attorney's office to look at the contract? Yes? Great. I'm looking at you, Katie.
She's
Thanks.
already done
I got
it.
a thumbs up from back there, so. Are there any other questions on this project? Okay, let's keep moving along.
Next up is in the Depot District. It's a request for $581,503 to go to the Station Center shared parking structure. This probably looks familiar. You remember it from the budget amendment in April. The council approved the board approved just over $2.9 million, or excuse me, $2.3 million. It would be 2.9 total if you approve this additional $500,000. It may be located at 233 South, 600 West. It's been discussed that multiple adjacent property owners are expected to have parking needs as well, and that this would be a way for multiple properties to coordinate and have a shared parking structure. Some of the details and the negotiations are ongoing. I don't know if Danny has any updates since April on this project.
No updates. We're still involved in those negotiations and discussions, and I would just add that this is also a topic of conversation for developers on the South Block as well, that there seems to be quite a bit of interest from those developers as part of building a mixed-use development to potentially have shared parking within those projects. So.
Okay.
There's also a policy question for the board about future-proofing parking structures. Some recent developers that have had meetings with the board have mentioned that they now have the approach of building a parking structure and expecting to convert it into other uses within the next 10 to 20 years. Mm-hmm. We don't know what the pace of self-driving cars implementation and rollout is going to be, but that's a topic we've been hearing more about recently.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, and it's almost weekly now that I hear from a developer that's looking at constructing something in the downtown core, and they're talking about that transitional nature of future parking structures. So I would love us, Madam Chair, to have a conversation in the future about maybe some policy considerations on our investment in parking structures going forward. In addition, I wondered if we have any idea, Danny, about the revenue generation potential of this investment.
We haven't gotten into those details in terms of revenue generation. From a best practices standpoint, we generally just approach it as if it's revenue neutral, that it just pays for itself in terms of whatever we get off the parking structure would go and fund whatever our maintenance and operation obligations are. And so if we can do that, that's kind of the baseline that we start at.
Is that in policy?
That is not. That's just, as I said, just our best practices of just how we kind of approach these projects. And so as we get into the details of what this parking structure may or may not look at, we can obviously have those numbers and provide that information if this has the potential to generate revenue, or if it's just something where we just are neutral on it and just provide the public parking or the benefit of shared parking. So
Great.
We can bring that information as we vet out the project.
Thanks. And Ben, if we could add that to our future policy discussion points. Thanks.
Will do.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
If there are no other questions, the next one is in North Temple. This is legally required under the interlocal agreement. It's also the next item on your agenda. It's a 10% set aside of the annual tax increment for creating a new school. As you'll hear in the next briefing, the amendment is to change that so it's no longer for a school, but improvements on safe routes to existing schools, such as hawk signals or crossing beacons. The current balance of the account is $164,000, and this would be an additional almost $42,000. The other item in North Temple is for a catalytic project. It's a request for $263,000 using North Temple tax increment. There's also a request for $505,000 from Program Income Fund, so the total request is $768,000. The project doesn't have a specific funding target or a cost estimate, and it's intentionally flexible to respond to opportunities in the project area. The board might want to have a discussion at a future date about what more specifically the catalytic project could look like, but there's also the benefit of keeping it flexible to see what opportunities arise.
I think, thanks for bringing that up. I think maybe what we would want to do on that note, Ben, is talk sort of about what the process is to identify catalytic projects. And I know this is something that's come up with James before on that North Temple of what we thought might be a catalytic project, and then what it wasn't one, and this maybe sort of can be a future thought for RDA and for us of what do we mean by catalytic, what does that look like, and what is the process by which we're starting to fund those catalytic projects. And of course, they're probably different for every project area, but I think maybe having a discussion in the future about that might be worthwhile for all of us. I like the idea of having something flexible and funding this, and it certainly needs it. I think the question is, how do we get there with the most bang for our buck? At least for me, that's the question, right? So
The board's previously talked about this as something that would generate property tax increment faster, but it's also been talked about as ways to remove barriers to private development or ways to better connect the neighborhood so that you have more traffic and activation. So that catalytic is certainly a squishy word.
right. Is there comments from the board on this?
We have a question. Would a Folsom corridor, the Folsom corridor, would it qualify for a catalytic project? Is this something that it's on that you guys talk about as well? I mean, the community definitely talks about that a lot.
Yeah, I would say that following up from some of the board's previous comments during the budget process, we plan on coming back with the North Temple area and presenting what that plan is for how we would define that catalytic project and what that could be and the steps and funding amount that would require. And to your point on Folsom, the Folsom corridor right now is kind of what the focus of that idea is kind of utilizing that as an asset and an amenity for the neighborhood and creating the district and the neighborhood around that as kind of that catalytic process
Okay.
of getting interest going in that area. So,
Awesome. So, yes.
spoiler alert.
It's like you guys can
Yeah,
read our
it's-
minds. Or just listen.
Next up is West Capitol Hill, a request for $440,000 for streetscape improvements from North Temple to 10th North. You'll probably recognize this from Budget Amendment number 4 as well. This is another contractual obligation where, per the interlocal agreement with the taxing entities, the tax increment can only go to this project. There are no other uses. The last update on the total estimated cost was about $1.2 million. The board has already appropriated almost $1.3 million for this. The additional $440,000 may go to enhanced scope elements. I don't have details on what those may be. I'm not sure if Danny has details on those, but the board may want to have a discussion about, with the additional funding, and if there will be additional years of funding, what the expanded scope could look like and what's preferable.
So on that, we are working with engineering to finalize the project scope so that they can do a estimate of what those costs would be. We anticipate that this would be the last year for the project as it's envisioned right now. And certainly we can include in that conversation if there's any additional scope or improvements that we want to add and what those would be and if those potentially require additional years of funding. So we hope to bring that project back to the board soon so that we can get approval and start doing the improvements.
Just since we've already allocated 1.3 million, we're all set here, and this would be fully funded. There's nothing else that the board needs to do to ensure that this is completed in a timely way.
There's nothing else in terms of additional funding sources, no. Now it's just kind of finalizing the design and
Okay.
working to put it out to bid.
Great, thank you.
The last three projects are in the funding's coming from Program Income Fund. First is $250,000 for Project Area Art. This is envisioned as a new annual program. If you remember RDA capital projects last year, there was discussion that the RDA did have a % for art policy that had been forgotten about, and this would be an effort to restore funding for that program. The agency is also working on an updated policy for art that'll be coming to the board that will guide the use of this funding. I believe it's envisioned to be coordinated with the city's Arts Council, and it would be available to multiple project areas.
Well, Madam Chair, one question about that is a policy going forward. Is there an idea about ongoing funding for it, like a percentage of projects or anything like that?
So the
being
policy, as we're working on it right now, would have two components. The first would be kind of reinstating what the old policy was of requiring developments of a certain scale to have that 1% for art required as part of their project costs, and then that would be on the developer and the project itself to include that art within it. And then the other component would be exactly what you're talking about. To what extent do we want to either put in policy and or mention the agency continuing to provide funding on an annual basis to do project area art, either within project areas or within some of those smaller scale projects, or just working with the Arts Council to find those opportunities. So it's going to have both the parts of what the developer would do and then what we would proactively do as well. And all that would come back to the board for discussion as to what level you want to commit to future funding.
Thank you.
Also, board members, just so to draw your attention, this project is on E59, and I just want to say I appreciate that it says a portion of the funds would be set aside for the maintenance of the projects. Yay.
Pointing that out. That's a big part of the policy discussion.
The next one is the North Temple Catalytic Project that we already talked about. And the last one is Gallivan Repairs. This is a request for $250,000, and the repairs are to the Grand Staircase and the Eastern Expansion Joint. The board approved $400,000 for this in Budget Amendment number 4 back in April. The total estimated cost is $1.25 million for the Grand Staircase and $170,000 for the expansion joint. So if you approve this additional $250,000, the project will not be fully funded and it would come back for additional requests in the future. There's also a policy question about if GUCOA could help fund some of these repairs, but also under what circumstances the RDA, as majority owner of the association, would be responsible to reimburse or cover funding shortfalls for the association. If there is no other questions, that's it for the projects. There are a couple general policy discussions if you're interested.
Hold on, I have a question on that one. So I'm not clear. So there is an estimated cost of $1.25 million for the Grand Staircase.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from the RDA board. You guys are requesting that from the RDA board, yes?
We are requesting what would essentially be the agency's participation in that total project cost. And so we are in the process of, with this funding, we will go out and finalize the contract to hire a architect to design it, cost it, figure out what that total project cost is. And to Ben's comment about GUCOA, capital project expenses are split between the owners association, so everyone will have to contribute, along with potentially a portion of Gallivan's capital project reserve fund as well. But ultimately, the agency, as the owner of Gallivan Center, we have approximately 60% of whatever shared costs are. And so as we look at a project that's potentially upwards of $1.2 million, this funding request is really just us acknowledging that repair coming and starting to set funds aside for what we anticipate to be the lion's share of the expense.
All right. Thank you.
So, board members, there are several other general policy questions, and I mean, we could go through some of them now, or if board members wanted to kind of look over these policy questions and maybe have that deeper discussion in August when we come back for our RDA board meeting. Then that's also when we would be adopting the CIP plan. And I'm fine either way. We're okay on time right now. So if people have specific questions or want to go through some of these policy questions, you decide, board members. I love being a dictator, but I'm giving you this chance. Okie doke, everyone's silent. So we'll come back with those general policy discussion questions maybe in August.
Will do.
Okay, with that, is there anything else on the CIP, this first sort of initial talk about CIP projects? Then we will move on to our third item of business, which is, also, by the way, thanks for the staff report, Ben. It was really great and easy and good information, so thank you for that.
Glad to hear it.
The North Temple Urban Renewal Area Interlocal Agreement. It's a really long name for an interlocal agreement.
We wanted you to be sure to know which one it was.
So,
Jill, welcome to the table.
thank you very much. So Ben did allude to this in the previous presentation. We do have a 10% set aside for the in the North Temple project area for the school district to save up for a potential construction of a new school. In a recent discussion we had with their administration, they expressed an interest in changing the use of that $2 million to go towards safety infrastructure for surrounding schools. So that is a request. No amount will change. They just would like to amend the agreement, and if you vote to approve that, we will take it to them in August.
Board members, are there any discussions on this? Yes, James and Andrew?
Which
Go for it.
one?
You got your microphone on.
Am I James,
Go
am I
ahead.
James or Andrew?
You're Andrew today. You were so caught off guard by getting your name, by me getting your name correct.
Thank you. This is Andrew speaking. I have no problem with the reallocation, the intention of those funds. The details are something that I'm not quite sure about the scope because Jackson Elementary is sitting right there, but are we talking about multiple elementary schools around that? Is the intention? Have they talked about sort of what they're talking about here?
They spoke of two specifically, but they wanted to keep it general to see if there were any additional needs. But the ones that they identify were Jackson and Franklin. And they talked about like hawk signals, just safety crossings for the schools.
Okay. At what point do we have a more detailed discussion on that level, I guess? How does that work going forward?
I think if that's what one of your concerns are and you want to make that as part of the conditions for the agreement, I think we would appreciate that direction so that we can make sure that we speak to that within the language of the agreement and tighten that up to whatever extent we want to do. And so if that's a concern of the board, I think we'd want to make sure that we understand what your priority is, if it's specific to certain schools or if you're specific to the North Temple area and the residents that.
The question I have, I guess, is because this would be the funding is school district funding. They own that money. But then they'd have to contract through the city to do any implementation of a project, right? Or they
No,
do
we
it
would just be the
separately?
pass-through of the receiving the tax increment and
Pass
then
it to
giving
them,
that to the school
but then they
district.
come back to the city for implementation of a project, or I believe at that
Yeah,
point.
it could be flexible in terms of whether it's a project that's initiated by them as part of a school improvement, or if it's something that they ask us to do within the neighborhood, and then we would run it as a standard RDA/city project.
And in that case, if it came back through the RDA, would the board be involved in that process at all at that point?
We could set that as a condition, yes, that we don't expend those funds until the board approves it.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of the scope of what they're thinking about here, the schools, what they're. I haven't seen a traffic study done on what the needs are over there. So I like the concept, but the details I'm not quite sure about. So I just like some information going forward. That's
Yeah,
all.
I think that's a good question. I don't know if we had really anticipated the specific projects and who would own or handle them, but because originally it was intended just to be a pass-through for them to build a school. So
Yeah.
we
okay.
we can follow up on that and get some more information.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, I just have a follow-up with that. So for me, I guess, do either of those schools fall within the project area? I guess it doesn't really matter, does it?
No, they're not in the project area as much as they're served by the residents within the project area.
So then this money that they could use could be used anywhere in the city, basically, right?
Well, our conversations with them is we wanted to keep it limited to that area, and specifically kids within that area or near that area that are the same schools that would serve that area are the ones that this money would go to. So you wouldn't see it go to schools on the east side or anything like that.
My concern is just figuring out what the money's going to be used for. Is just finding out the project ideas and
I think that's we can certainly have that conversation and bring you more information, because at this point, the one certainty we knew is that the school district was not looking at any plans to build a new school in that area.
Right.
And so we wanted to just make sure that we made these funds available for something that would provide a benefit rather than just sitting on them for 20 years. And so if that's something where the board would like to see more detail on specific projects, we can certainly bring that back.
So if I can maybe, if we look at the amendment for the agreement in number 1, it says the original amendment shall be amended to allow, or agreement shall be amended to allow the district to use the reserve account for purposes other than construction, including but not limited to construction of hawk signals near existing district schools. Would it address your concerns if we included something in there that defined the project area or defined sort of where that it just says the North Temple project area, but I'm just trying to help
yeah.
give some direction on what would.
What I was trying to lead into is that we have Tiger Grant that we've received funding for, and I don't know if it's fully funded and if that's something that we can use those funds to because of the bridge that's going over the railroad tracks for West High, if that's something that can help, fund that fully.
I think an intention statement might be helpful. I don't want to hold up this process because I agree with what they're trying to do. I just didn't understand when they build their own school, they don't have to go back through us,
Right.
essentially, right? If they're going to do a public safety infrastructure project, it does go back through either the council or the RDA. That's what I'm not quite sure about. About what point do we review this again? So I don't want to hold it up. I do endorse the idea. The details would be important to figure out how we are going to communicate about this going
I
forward.
guess my question, so that we can, Jill, you mentioned that if we voted on it today, you would take it to the school district in August.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Would board members feel comfortable voting on it today, or would you want this to be back on an agenda in August with some updates to the potential interlocal agreement that would address your concerns? And then you would be able to take it to them in September?
I think we could take it to them in August. They have 2 meetings, I believe, in August, so maybe the later August meeting that we would go to.
Okay.
Yeah, that would work.
Does that sound good for everyone? So maybe we can draft some language in this amendment that kind of addresses some of those concerns, or an intent statement or something along those lines. And then we'll put this on the August agenda, the August 20th agenda, and be able to hopefully take action on it at that point. Does that work for everyone? Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Okie doke. We are on, somebody pointed out to me, by the way, that I say that a lot. So, yes. We're on to Bryn Shore. Court, if you would like to join us, and Corinne and Allison. Denny, you're not on my names table, so you can leave if you want.
I'm happy to step away if you need to. Is Corinne coming?
And just for time's sake, so the board members know, I spoke with Danny earlier today, and I figured since we actually have seen this presentation before, and a lot of us had that small group meeting, that they didn't need to go through the whole presentation again. It is available if anybody has questions, but I thought we'd kind of just get down to the nitty-gritty of it, which is deciding to take action on the loan itself. So I asked if they would just kind of jump straight to that. However, if people want to go through the presentation, we're happy to do that, or it is available. But I figured we all knew what the project was, and I certainly don't want to hinder anyone from asking questions. Just figured we would get down to business. So with that, it's all you, Court.
Okay, and I guess I would look at Allison to see if there were some things you wanted to cover.
The only thing I would suggest is that the board also consider the policy questions on the 4th page of the staff report. Some of them have to do with potential changes in RDA policy. Others have to do with the possible nature of making certain exceptions to RDA policy as it currently exists. That's it. I'll leave it to court and the experts, other experts, sorry.
Well, thank you. As the chairwoman mentioned, we covered this last month at the board meeting. We had a good straw poll with the board and favorable support for the project. And so this is the actual follow-up with the board with the actual consideration of the loan terms. David Brent and Whitney Weller are here with us again today, so if we have specific questions for the developer, they're here. The loan terms are sort of projected up on the screen there, and we can, I'll get straight to those, but we can go back and lay some groundwork if that's helpful. Bryn Shore is requesting two things. This is a $70 million project. It's got 9% tax credits and 4% tax credits, and they're applying for Olene Walker money, and we're turning over every stone here. But given the project goals, there's a lot that was asked when we released the RFQ, and so there is a request for RDA participation in two forms. One would be a $6.4 million loan, and as shown on the slide there, that would follow the interest rate on that loan would follow the policy in the loan program to be the United States Treasury yield curve rate at the time of closing. And then we would typically add 3 percentage points to that. In this particular scenario, and this is part of the loan program policy, developers can qualify for interest rate reductions if they meet certain public benefit criteria. And Bryn Shore has done that, and the public benefits that they can achieve on this project are shown there. There are 7 of them. You can only really get a maximum of 6 for the interest rate reductions, but we wanted to show you the 7th one anyway. It's a 30-year loan, and it would be repaid from the available cash flow on the project. The second ask would be for the RDA to finance the purchase price of the property. So in other words, instead of us getting $5 million, which is the fair market value of the property at closing, we would accept payments on the property over a 30-year term, and this would have an interest rate of 1%. And also would be paid from available cash flow. Both of these loans would have a balloon at 30 years, and so if there's any unpaid balance at that time, we would recuperate that total cost. And so I guess the only other thing I would add is that subsequent to last month's briefing and straw poll by the board, we took this to the RDA Finance Committee. They reviewed this, both the loan and the seller's note in detail, the project financials, the pro formas, and unanimously recommended approval of both of those loans. So with that, we're available for questions.
Board members, do you have any questions?
Madam Chair, if there are...
I just have, I guess for me, and then this might be when we're looking at creative financing, an interest rate for 30 years at 1%, that's a great rate, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if in future loans that we can look at, if we're looking at a 10-year, a 20-year, a 30-year call where we bump the interest rates, if we're looking at something like this, because 1% for 30 years, that is a long time.
That might be, as we can continue our housing loan policy discussions, something that we might want to bring up in the future when we...
That's why I bring it up, is because I think it's, it's something else to discuss that I brought up too about, assets. When we're looking at the central business district, maybe we don't sell the property and we retain it on long-term leases. Do you know what I mean? I think that's another thing we need to look at.
Sure. I think those are good future policy discussions, for sure.
Madam Chair, does that fall into a community land trust realm? I don't know if that's the way Board Member Rogers meant it, but.
I think it would probably be more of a policy discussion on how we do our loan program, right?
But
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it could be a way to get at some community land trust opportunities on future projects.
I think for us as an agency, we would always look to hold on to the asset so we can continue to reuse it and get that value out of it, whereas if you put it in community land trust, it is dedicated for that in and of itself, and that's on its own. And so I think to the point of getting return on your investment, whether that's some kind of repayment in the future or holding on to it in a lease, I think this calls into discussion Allison's point about the seller's note and the policy of that. And I think that's probably where this conversation needs to come back to the board and say that we don't really have that within our policy right now of holding on to a note and receiving payments for a property. And so I think that would be something that we'd want to come back and say, if we're going to count that as an option now, what are the parameters, what's the interest rate, and what kind of terms do we want to offer as part of that incentive? Right now, we really just have the ability to write down land. And so this is much better because we ultimately do get paid for the land, which we can then recycle and put back to use. Whereas if you put in the land trust, then we don't have the opportunity to recycle and revolve those funds for future redevelopment. So that's certainly just part of the policy discussion that I think would come out of that.
May I say, though, that I think isn't recognizing that in a community land trust situation, the benefit we're receiving is perpetual affordability, or that's the intention of that kind of a negotiation. So it's not that we're necessarily putting the money back into a revolving loan fund, but we're preserving affordability, which is potentially saving us investments in other loan forms, maybe even on the same parcel decades later.
Yes.
Just a different return on the investment.
We'll put this in our pending agenda items discussion, and I'm sure it will come up again as we continue to have our housing discussions. But I do appreciate you bringing that up, James, because I think it is an interesting policy discussion as we continue moving forward with these and providing affordable housing, or trying to provide affordable housing for the city. So is there any further discussion on this?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
What was the term of the affordability we built into this?
It's a 50-year deed restriction.
50-year deed restriction? Is that tied into these terms here, the 1% for 30 years at all, or is that dependent on something else?
Well, the deed restriction, those will come in the form of the land use restricted agreement, or the LURA, that will be signed with the tax credit investors.
I'm just thinking about
recorded on the property.
The economics of it, because I know the longer the deed restriction, the more we have to subsidize in some capacity, right? Is that where this is coming in, or something else? Do you know?
No, we tried to get repayment as quickly as we could, and as we sort of worked through the financials with the developer, that's we're looking for repayment, and 30 years was kind of the quickest we could get it with these interest rates.
With the 1%?
Mm-hmm.
A mortgage.
Okay.
What does it mean that repayment shall be based on available cash flow? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so that is that means that the hard debt or the bank debt will be paid first. They'll be in first position in terms of the available returns. That it'll be paid first, and then we'll be paid next. And that's not an uncommon role for municipal government to play in affordable housing projects, is to kind of come into that soft lender capacity and participate in that way.
Oh, I read it differently. I thought you were saying that, well, let's say there is no cash flow, then we don't get paid.
Well, that could be the case, yeah. But it has been modeled, and the Finance Committee has sort of reviewed those models and made the determination that there will be available cash flow and capability to repay us. And that's where the balloon comes in too, is if for some reason we're not quite there at year 30, we still get a full repayment.
Great, thank you.
If there's no further discussion, I would look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the resolution that would approve $6.4 million loan request and a $5 million seller's note to Brinshore Development for mixed-use, mixed-income affordable housing project at 255 South State Street.
Okay, I have a yes.
Any discussion?
We've just discussed.
I know, on the motion. Discussion on the motion.
Well, I have hold please. I have a motion by Board Member Wharton and a second by Board Member Luke and a discussion by Board Member Mendenhall.
Well, as I think one of 3 board members who were here with previous work on this parcel, I just want to bid Brinshore the best wishes to a successful construction, development, and then occupation of this project. May it never come before us again.
Thank you, Board Member
One more time. Just when it's finished for the ribbon cutting. Bring it back one more time.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Thank you. I am very excited about this project as well, so let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There we go. You got it. Thank you,
Thank you very
Bryn Shore,
much.
and we are looking forward to the ribbon cutting.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
know I missed it earlier, but I thought that Allison's policy question, which is just for future discussion, was a good one, as it doesn't necessarily relate to what we just passed. But going forward, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to page 4 where they are there. That if we get in terms of the pending discussion items, which is becoming quite a pen full of items, that the seller's notes are not mentioned in our real property disposition policy. And I do think we should talk about that as to what James was getting at and what kind of different I can't say that word, machinations we could come up with in combination with other loans. I want to ask that we do that.
I anticipate that'll actually be part of a larger conversation as we look at not just our land disposition, but our loan program and how that works within some of the direction and some of the things with the NOFA of how we're structuring those loans. And we as staff are realizing that the program we have right now does not really fit the affordable housing world, and that we need to come back to the board and have the conversation of potentially seeing how we're going to do that moving forward. And that would be part of that conversation.
Thank you. I hope when we have that conversation that we have a piece of it to look at the inventory of properties that the RDA owns, some of which are really not developable as they are. But if we could talk about maybe incentivizing or encouraging property developers to look at adjacent parcels, and the idea of us combining to make our little tidbits here and there more viable as an incentive to develop the kind of things we want around the city.
We can include that as that conversation.
Great idea. And I just want to say one other thing. Court, I know you've been working really hard on this project, and congratulations to you. You did an excellent job on all of this, and I appreciate all of your hard work. And now you don't have to wake up at 2 in the morning worrying if we're going to vote.
You
got it.
read appraisals at 2 in the morning. And Corinne is on the project too, and it's been a team effort, so thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. Okay. Moving on to the NOFA, speaking of sort of housing and affordability. And Tammy and Tracy joining us.
Am I on this one, or can I?
I mean, it doesn't say that you are, but you might as well sit there.
I figure
never know.
once I'm here, I'm not. Yeah, I would just tee it up that I think, I believe as part of the budget discussion that we talked about the NOFA and some of the details of how that would potentially be targeted or when we release those funds. And so as staff, we went back and reviewed the policy and realized that a lot of the board's questions and concerns that we were asking about in terms of how to put this out and if we were covered, we had already had those conversations and discussed as part of the policy, but we wanted to come back and speak to that and let you know the details of the NOFA and it being released.
Great, thank you. So this is just, as Danny alluded to, just an informational briefing about our affordable housing notice of funding availability that's currently out. We have approximately $10.7 million available. 4.5 of the 10.7 is set aside for the high opportunity areas, as we've been discussing with the board, and the remaining 6.2 is available for projects anywhere within the city's municipal boundaries. So the idea with this notice of funding availability is to put the funds out through a competitive and transparent public process, get as many applications as we can, go through the project review and selection process, and then if there are funds left over out of the 10.7, we'll come back to the board to discuss whether we release another round of the NOFA or maybe issue the funding on a first come, first served basis. And as Danny mentioned, the funds currently out through the NOFA, the 10.7, will be administered according to a policy that the board adopted in June of 2018. That policy outlined 11 funding priorities, which just generally are transit proximity, equity and geographic distribution of housing, so the areas of opportunity, mixed income, displacement prevention, innovation of housing types, neighborhood revitalization, underserved populations, long-term affordability, sustainability, leveraging, and financial viability. So those are the 10 kind of funding priorities we're looking at. To be eligible for NOFA funds, the project has to have units that are 60% AMI or below. We are looking at lower AMIs, targeting those as one of the funding priorities. And the policy that you all adopted back in June of 2018 lays out the approval process and the general terms that we will underwrite these loans with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy. She'll give an update on kind of the schedule we're looking at and the process.
All right, thank you, Tammy. So in terms of the schedule, the NOFA was released on June 24th, just a few weeks ago. The application and guidelines are posted on both on our website and the Utah Public Procurement website. We will be holding two informational meetings for anybody interested in this program. The first meeting is actually tomorrow in the afternoon, and the other one will be next Thursday, July 18th in the morning. The application deadline is August 16th. After this date, the staff will review and evaluate the applications, and from there, the projects will be reviewed by the Finance Committee, and the board will make the final funding allocation, or final decisions on the funding allocations, which is tentatively scheduled in September. Outreach for the NOFA included a website hosting the two informational meetings, press releases, email blasts, online advertising, and social media. And with that, we can take any questions you may have about the NOFA.
I guess mine is just more of what's on the street. What are people saying? Have you heard anything about the NOFA and what people are asking? And is there interest in it?
Yeah, we've heard interest from a few developers. We'll find out more tomorrow when we have our developer information meeting. That will give us a good idea of who's applying and who's interested. So we have, as Tracy said, one tomorrow afternoon at 4. It's here in the City County building. And then one next week at 9 a.m. next Thursday. So.
Anyone else? Questions? Thoughts? Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right, we are going to very quickly move on to the next discussion, which is simply a little internal board policy discussion on RDA Housing Trust Fund. As everyone is very well aware, the RDA moved the Housing Trust Fund. The board decided and the council decided to move the trust fund with funding our future dollars over to the RDA. And I think our intent was made clear, both in discussion and ordinance, that this was a way to streamline the processes of development. And I think sort of having the NOFA at or around the same time as the Housing Trust Fund dollars kind of accomplishes exactly that intent, which is to say these dollars are available for developers and that we're going to allow staff to figure out what is the best route for developers to get that financial backing or gap financing that they may need. I have full faith that if someone needs money out of the Housing Trust Fund, it will go through an application process and the money will be out the door very quickly. And I also think that I trust that both HAND and CAN and RDA staff are going to continue doing the amazing work that they do. And that is what we, like I said, trust them to do. And I am certain that any questions or issues that may come up in this process, because we did change things a little bit, and if there are issues and policy discussions that need to happen, we have a housing working group that I hope we can address some of those policy questions. And then, of course, as everyone is aware, we have a 6-month review where those questions could also be answered. So I know that there had been a few questions, but I think that that's our intent, I think, was made clear in all of our previous discussions, and that I trust the administration to administer. So I don't know if any other board member wants to say anything to this item. Great. Then we'll move on from that. Report announcements from the executive director? No? Okay. Report announcements from the RDA staff? Oh, it's you, Danny. I don't know why you left the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak one more time on behalf of our 50-year celebration. We had that on June 21st, and it was a success, so thank you to everyone who showed up, both current and past council members, staff, advisory committee leaders. I wanted to say thank you again one more time to Amanda and Rachel and Ed, who worked a lot on this project over the past 9 months. For those of you who don't know or haven't looked through the copy of the book, I would repeat and direct you to that and remind you or inform you that really what went into this book is Amanda, Ed, and Rachel going through 50 years of project files to research kind of what we have done and get the information. And the reason for that was not just to provide a colorful book and commentary, but they really went in and got all the details. And so I wanted to kind of speak to some of those details real fast, because our goal in doing that was if we were going to do it, we were going to do it once, and we were going to get the information out of it so we could have our history as well as use that to move forward in terms of what we've done. So if I could just take a few moments and repeat some of the bullet items that we had at the 50-year in terms of information. The RDA over 50 years has done 349 major redevelopment projects, 52 of which have been adaptive reuse and historic restoration projects. 116 were commercial projects. We have built 6,990 housing units citywide, 2,951 of which are affordable. We've done $53 million in commercial loans, $170 million in public improvements, $3.4 million in public art funding, and in total we have done $530 million in reinvestment within the community. So I know Laura is a numbers person, and so she's probably back there smiling, and I will take this opportunity to say that this is her last board meeting, so I don't know if she would like to come up and speak to this, that she's been guiding this agency for the past number of years, and we are sorry to see her go, but those are pretty impressive numbers from our standpoint. We want to make sure we get those out there, and so if anyone needs extra copies of the 50-year book, please take some. We brought a stack of them. It will be available on our website. And then our goal is to start really trying to monitor and use these metrics moving forward to kind of continue to tell our history and what the impact is on the city as a whole. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions
And
on that?
Yes, 1 second. Thank you, Danny. Thanks for those numbers. It's incredible how much work's been done. And real quick, Laura, I don't think that the board approved you moving.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure you can't. So sorry. Hope that works out. I do actually want to thank you, since this is your last board meeting, Laura. Thank you so much for all of your very hard work and leadership and direction in the Department of Economic Development, as it relates to each of the very different and awesome departments, divisions under you, which is the RDA and the Arts Council and Business Development. You've really made an impact on our city. You've made an impact in a lot of different ways. You've certainly made an impact on me personally, and I am grateful to call you a friend, and I wish you the very, very, very best, and really wish you weren't leaving, but I am very happy to see all of the work that you've done here and what you're going to be doing in the future. So, Board Member Mendenhall?
I don't know how to go on the heels of that, but I wanted to say my thanks to Laura as well. And I think that the creation of an economic development department in Salt Lake City couldn't have been in better hands than it has in yours. And the work that you've done really in succession planning to keep this economic development rolling in Salt Lake City. I talk to people, as you probably could guess, a lot lately in the city, and I hear praises of you and the work that you have done and what you've brought to Salt Lake City. And we're going to be looking at that Net Promoter Score. That's just a tiny indicator of the real seismic shift you've made in economic development potential and reality today in our city. I thank you. And I want to mention that to hear that, over $500 million in investment over the last 50 years, the RDA is our unicorn. That's $500 million, and although it's over 50 years and not a 1 year's value of a company, RDA is the unicorn of Salt Lake City Corporation, and what I'm so proud to have ever been a board member. I'm proud of the work that you all do, and we're really moving some mountains here in the city. So thank you all, and Laura, we wish you the best always. We hope you get a tattoo of the skyline that you've helped to create before you leave the city.
I'll go with you. It's fine.
I just want to echo that too. And as your council member, I hate to lose such a great resident. But I want to, people often say, this or that put us on the map. But I want to thank you for putting Salt Lake on the lists, because under your leadership, we've seen us be on lists for business development, for young people buying houses, for best cities for millennials. And I think that is in large part to the work that you've done and the people that work for you, the team that you've led. And so I also am sorry to see you go. But our loss is definitely... what's this place called?
Yeah.
Ri-
Is that where you're going? Richmond?
Richfield.
Richmond.
This Richmond, it's definitely, I don't know, some little town, East Coast, never heard of it. But it's certainly their gain. So I hope that you'll come back to see us soon and continue to keep an eye on the fruits of all of your labor. So thank you.
So Laura, I've been a witness of the Economic Development Department since 2005 when I was an intern, and the staff for the Economic Development Department was the director and the small business manager, which is Ed Butterfield, and Anna, the intern. So we were three, and Alison McFarland was the senior advisor for the administration at the time. And so we've seen a lot of really good people try to make a difference, but these last 3 years have been monumental. So thank you so much for allowing staff, give them wings to the work, to do the work that they did. Thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you so much for your care and for your friendship. I mean, we met and I think we clicked, and thank you so much. So you'll be missed, and it's Richmond that you're going to, right? So we have a planner from the former planner from Salt Lake City Planning Division, Nick Britton. He is in Richmond, so hopefully you get to work with him. So he's really lucky. So thank you so much again. And thank you, RDA, of course, the unicorns.
Anyone else?
I have to be inappropriate, right?
Yes.
Laura and I sit on a board together. I don't know if anyone knew that.
By law, isn't she still on that board?
By law, I don't
isn't
think she can
She
leave.
required? I think her name's in the statute. So you'll have to fly back for those.
But anyway, this board is, I don't know if you know or not, it's controversial. And I'm just grateful to have somebody that I can bounce ideas off and be able to make changes that benefit Salt Lake City. I know that these things are things that aren't spoken about a lot, but personally, on a personal level, I have felt alone, and having some people there to help, keep me through them, that are on the board and get me through that, it has been monumental, I think, for the board, and I think for Salt Lake City, so I appreciate you.
All right. Yes, of course. Come on up. But don't make me cry.
I'm going to try not to, because I'm the crier, and everyone knows that about me, so just keep the tissues coming. Thank you. See what I mean? I can't even get through it. This has been an incredible 3 years, but while I get to sit here and take a lot of credit, it's really the people back here make me look good every single day. And so, thank you, Danny and everyone. From the cabinet to the mayor having a vision for economic development, to the awesome RDA staff, to the board who lets us do this great work. Thank you all. It's a tough decision to leave, but it was a great opportunity professionally. So you are all my friends, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Like Dolly Parton said in Steel Magnolias, no one cries alone. My presence. Thank you so much. Okay, that moves on. I'm going to wipe the tears away to the report of the chair, vice chair. Vice chair, do you have anything?
No.
I have a little something, real quick. Yeah, I just have a little something that is more based on city council, but I have the microphone, so you have to listen. This is a thank you that Aaron got from a program called Ant Flow, and it was recognizing our what we as a council did to fund our initiative for free feminine hygiene products. And so, if you'll give that to Charlie, and so we'd like to really recognize the men in the room who helped us with this, and give you a pin called Flow Bro. So you guys are now our Flow Bros.
And you're going to wear
we
it.
Appreciate your
James.
support.
James gets it first. Go.
I'm being badged.
Here, you can read.
Okay, I'll read it. The Flow Bro.
Don't be ashamed.
There's a bumper sticker on your car, too. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all I had. So if there's nothing else, we have no consent, no closed session. We are done. Council Chairperson,
So
when do you want us back?
let's come back at the originally scheduled time of 3:30.
Perfect.